I can't get logged on since everything updated. I can do like the first half of the articles and then.
I heard I made it for
Was it a good year for
so-
the?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we,
What'd you say? What'd you do?
only
it's
had
with,
reporting up
with the
until
governor
August,
Oh,
Last week,
but
that's a good thing.
so far so good.
That, you know.
working on,
We had fewer pass sales and more daily admissions,
Excellent.
which we don't really like to see, even though
Yeah.
it makes us more money.
also reached out to
Yeah.
a plumber
Like,
that we
it's-
needed to,
It just shows that people are having a harder time coming up with the money all at once.
technology.
But we did do, able to offer scholarships this year for first
Building code services
and
for,
we have another 120
so anyway,
family
we're,
pass scholarships for next year to
but the
fund
fire
it.
was the piece.
So that makes our normal family pass price is
delving into the
175, and it
PERS
makes it 25.
thing, and I think
God.
totally
For
missed
120
it.
people. For 120
You
families,
don't have a headache?
which is up to 6
Oh,
people.
it did. It just went down the
Yeah.
rabbit trail. It was like one thing,
And
another,
there's
another
is a catch
article,
though.
another.
It's a
The-
mess.
the,
It's
is
a
a
complete
mess.
Because it's
mess.
funded through Pacific Source, they need to be on OHP through Pacific Source. But that's,
Oh.
Too many
that's a lot of the
chickens.
town.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to take a look at it, but they're gonna have to this session.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of AOC's top priorities.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, because it's ruining budgets. And it's, you know, I don't want to want to look somebody in the eye and say, well, you know how it
How many swim meets were there?
There's not
Just
enough
one.
for you.
Just one?
Sorry.
One big one that closed the pool, there's
See,
fundraisers and sprinters.
when I was a kid, there were swim meets.
So we'll
all the
see how
time.
that all pans out this session. It'll be a
Well, not all the time.
kind of
I'd
like
say
carbon
We were
maybe
talking
one
about
month.
trying to figure out a way to have,
heated piece as well.
or like a local,
'Cause
Yeah.
like Hood River, the Dalles.
We get left out on this side.
Maybe
kind of
us
stuff.
host like a senior or something,
So, the
like-
west side.
like a local one, and then see if Hood River, and maybe Hood River will help us, and then maybe Hood River would do one in the wintertime,
Yeah,
and we would help them.
yeah, that would be
Anyway,
great.
we'll
I'd
get
like
And
to do a
all
master's
trying to figure out a
meeting,
way,
too.
yeah, a master
What?
meeting
We
would
don't
be
have to
awesome
follow
too.
along. We can write the records.
So we're
Well,
trying to figure out another way to incorporate without
we get outvoted.
a much, not as
Sometimes.
much
I think
fanfare,
that is
and
true.
just a more
Get outvoted.
condensed
And,
version.
And it's only, and it only has to be one
Start it.
vote.
I mean, we could do it
So
before we open
that's
up
the
Saturday or
problem.
Sunday.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
You know, and just get to one,
All
one
the
big,
roads.
Yeah.
And
you know, and then it doesn't,
whether or not a bill makes it in or out, where it goes. And what's best for the
Yeah, we were
entire
thinking
state.
like for kids that, like there's some kids that don't go
We
to
were
state
working on
or
the opioid
whatever, but
piece.
are so close to that, you know.
Medicine, secure
Yeah.
medicine,
Oh,
take
yeah.
that
racing
bill,
experience if any.
which
It's
was
good, right?
for the
That's what I
entire
always
state.
figure.
Okay.
Yeah, Skylar's going
Shut it down.
to camp. He went to one
Well, yeah,
in
$63,000
Kansas
from the
last
pharmaceutical
month.
companies
And he goes this Saturday and
to
Sunday
campaign.
to another one in Camas,
That's how it works.
which will be about fitter,
Unfortunately.
faster,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
like they'll be
Or
able
you're
to,
down
so it's
there,
gonna
or
be.
you're-
that's a great clinic, so we've hosted those.
Have it?
And,
In Hood
It's a
River?
tough system. It's a
Yeah,
tough
I figured
system
Hood River may
to-
have before. Yeah, this one's in Camas.
To butt heads with,
I'm trying to
so to
remember,
say.
it's not really got it was.
You gotta
Yeah,
learn.
I don't follow
learn
swimming
the
well enough to, I mean, unless it's Ryan Lochte or whatever. Yeah. But apparently it's an Olympic swimmer and then a
That sucks.
Paralympic
That's wrong.
swimmer, pro swimmer as well,
When
which I think is really cool.
one piece would
So,
provide services
so two of them, yeah.
for the entire state of Oregon. Keep waters clean, keep the stuff out of the
Yeah,
landfills.
but I saw them, yeah.
They're starting over, the governor's working it, but it's, maybe we'll get some. 50,000 people are dead because of that damn stuff. We gotta have a way to
Doesn't seem that.
Because of what?
opioids,
Oh,
so.
Yeah, that was probably a weird conversation to be a fly on the wall. What?
yeah. I'm surprised that the number's that low. I thought I would have
No,
thought
it's,
higher.
it is more, that's just so far this year. It'll go up. Hello, Stacy.
Hello,
Scott.
how are you?
doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Okay,
Sure.
it's 5:30. Are we ready? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna call the meeting of the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Agency Board to order. Roll call, please.
Scott Baker,
Present?
Stacy Coburn,
Present.
John Frederick,
Here.
Bob Delaney,
Present.
Tanner Elliott is absent, Steve Kramer,
Present.
Darcy Lynn Curtis,
Present.
Linda Miller,
Present.
and Chuck Rowley is absent.
Okay, pledge allegiance. All join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next is approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
A second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, that passes. Approval of minutes of the August 21st, 2018 meeting.
Move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes. Okay, now is the time for public comment. Is there anyone who wants to make public comment? Okay, seeing no one, and seeing no one that wants to make a comment, we'll go to presentation. The Dalles Main Street branding.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a presentation by the Dalles Main Street, the president of the Main Street, what they are been doing lately, as well as some of their branding items.
So do you want me to be up here, or is that okay? All right, so let me hand out.
Thank you.
Sir. Thank you. How you doing?
Thank you.
Meet you people this way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.
So what I handed out is just sort of a little two-pager explaining about what is Main Street, just in case it's not real clear, because I know it's something that people just don't run into all the time. So this just sort of says, you know, who we are, what our purpose is, where the money goes to. So basically, we're a group of volunteers, and the focus is that Main Street itself started in 1972 to preserve some of the historical buildings when we were having urban blight. You know, it sort of started in the 70s. So Main Street has sort of happened all across the United States. The Dalles applied in 2010 and was granted to join the national program. What that means is that we have resources available, and also what it means is that we have the ability as a 501c3 to go after grants that other agencies or entities are not allowed to. So the state of Oregon has developed a pot of money for Main Streets for projects such as facade improvements and so on. So to give you some examples of some of the projects we've done downtown is the Oddfellows building. We've got the marble back. And what else did we do on that?
We did tuck pointing along the face of the building, restored the cornice and reset some of the parapet across the building. The marble was the kickoff.
Yeah, down the bottom. Lemke building, right behind here. That one, we brought back the transom windows that were behind the old awning and just plywooded up. The A's Sewing, that one's a project that's gonna kick off on September 30th, where we have a grant, we received a grant to take down the old, that metal facade and, you know, see what's behind it and then try to get that one fixed up again. Victor Johnson's, the Hebring House, that's a big project that we got the grant for, 50,000. And then also, next month, we'll be announcing, looking for proposals for a $200,000 grant. That's gonna be coming out next year, so Main Street. So that's what we do, is we help building owners and businesses find funds to do their projects. And the whole point is to vitalize the downtown. So I'm gonna put a little plug in, I highlighted it in yellow. As I said, we're all volunteers, the little bit of staff we have is funded through fundraising, and also we have grants, we get some administrative fees out of grants, and then the city also is a big supporter of what we're doing financially. So I invite you, I have tickets, if any of you are interested, to our event. It's next week, a week from this coming Saturday, 4th floor of the Commodore. All right, so you can sort of look through that and sort of see all the things we're doing. The cruise boat coordinator is also under Main Street, which I have to say, if you've noticed the boats we've gotten in fact, Thursday, we're gonna have 4 boats sitting here. And you're probably wondering, how in the world can we fit 4 boats here? Well, we can't. There's gonna be 1 at the city dock, 1 at the marina, and 2 are gonna be actually moored out in the river, and that's the National Geographic ones, and they're gonna motor boat their passengers in. So it's just amazing that, you know, they love the Dalles. They just love being here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the branding project that we kicked off, I think it was in June. So why are we doing that? And it's for downtown, is back in 2016, actually even before that, 2015, we spent a year developing a survey for downtown businesses to find out what is it they needed, and it's under our Business Retention and Expansion Program. So working with many partners to develop a robust survey, one of the items that came out that was one of the top 3 priorities, the business folks downtown said, we want Main Street to help us with a branding, or actually I should say a marketing of downtown as a whole. The businesses said, you don't need to market my individual business, but market the Dalles, the downtown, the Dalles. So we were lucky that we had a gentleman who moved here to the Dalles last fall, whose career was international branding. And so with that, I asked him to be the facilitator for this effort. And we had a mix of the Main Street board members and business owners downtown. So after, I think we had 3 brainstorming sessions, we came up with a skeleton. What that skeleton is, if you think about branding, it's not the old way of branding, which is the Nike swoosh and the just do it. Branding these days is a concept of a story, so that if somebody hears even parts of that story, they go, oh yeah, that's the Dalles, I get it. So you're making this emotional connection with customers and with visitors. So some of the stuff we came up with, as I said, it's a skeleton. We went after a grant to hire a creative agency to flesh out that skeleton with some words, with some pictures and images. So the whole point is that we'll have something that we can then give to the businesses so that they can use it then for promoting their individual businesses. So it's sort of like, me here in the Dalles, I would talk about how I'm in the Dalles, and I would use this branding information to have that connection then with our regional customers, our local customers, and our visitors that we have here. So the skeleton is just some of the concepts is it's the soul of the gorge. That idea really came up. We have entrepreneurial spirit. We have the downtown resurgence, the walkability downtown. These are our proof points. Our brand character is that we're passionate, we're committed, we're gritty. We're acknowledging that we have that side to us, because it's here, it's us, it defines us. The specialness is sort of that we're friendly. We always thought a common theme that kept popping up was that small town Americana, hometown concept. We looked at who the key audiences were. As I said, visitors, local, and then the 80-mile trade radius. And so some of the guiding principles is that all are welcome here in the Dalles. We're hardworking, we want to have fun, And we're evolving, we're a changing community. So we'll see what the creative agencies come up with, but that's our skeleton that we have right now. So I sort of went through this real quick. Are any questions, wondering, what we're gonna do with all this? What we're gonna do next?
I just have a comment to make. I'm a docent at the Landmark, and I was surprised, I always ask, where are you from? And when they say that they're quite a ways away from here, not just Portland or Seattle area, but quite a ways away, like East Coast, Midwest, you kind of assume that they're on a boat. That isn't true. More times than not, they've just decided they wanted to come to the Northwest, and they've heard about Hood River and the Dalles, and that's why they're here.
Yeah, it's really neat. I know in my shop, it's like there's so many visitors from all over, even internationally. And it's
Right.
just, they all look at the Dalles and they love it, So sometimes I think us that are here, we have blinders on, we just don't see some of this in front of us sometimes, So we have to look at things with like tourist eyes, so we see it anew. Yeah.
I have a question. What's your general timeline or time frame for this, or is that just kind of fluid depending on how
branding one?
things? Mhm.
So we applied for the Travel Oregon grant. In October, I believe, will be the, or maybe it's, no, I think it's October, is going to be the awarding, whether we get it or not. And then we have 2 agencies that Philip Mosher has been recommending and we've been working with. So then we'll see, hopefully we get the funding so we can get that fleshed out, because it would be really cool.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else have questions? Thank you, Louise.
Great, thanks for giving me some time, and really, join us at the Commodore, it'll be cool, 4th floor, you get to see the city lights from a nice party up there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is discussion items. And Hanlon Development Proposal.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam Chair. If you remember, Ms. Hanlon was at our last meeting, and we introduced her and her project. And since that time, she's been further refining some of her financial information, so we thought we would bring that back to you tonight. And then also, as part of your minutes from your last meeting, her letter that was part of your packet for that meeting is also included, if you just want to refresh yourself on her company and her proposals. You would, Ms. Hanlon?
Our battery is pretty low.
Does the power cord for yours work? They look really similar. Yeah, it looks just like mine.
Don't you miss the days of flip charts and presentation boards and easels and
I tried to bring these last time, maybe you get.
Overheads.
As long as the person has good handwriting.
This is the dream screen, blue sky.
talked about, generally your receptiveness to a project downtown. And I appreciate you letting me come back and make this presentation. And so I've spent the last month trying to put in my own head, organize in my own head what we know so far about this project. And so that's what this presentation is. And I guess, it's really just my thoughts. So it's a little bit repetitive, and it may not be in perfect order, but it's my thoughts. I'm going to try and walk you through it. And so if I'm telling you things you already know, that please don't take it to insult. This is the project that you'll see again. This is what we've just finished. That's a rendering of what we were going to do in Canby, and I took some photos today to throw into the slide just for a reference point. And again, it's a pretty good comparable project because the size of the towns are the same. You're both about 15,000, and so that helps. And then, as you know, this is the site we're looking at, the DG Motors site. So to date, it's been, I think, Dave, has it been a year or more?
Seems forever.
Forever. So, it's at least a year, I think. So we started with a phase 1, because I had an intern helping me with that last summer. So we did a phase 1 on the site, and it recommended a phase 2 because there were some hot spots or things that they wanted to look into more. We did a phase 2, both Dave and I contributed to the cost of that. They did find some spots they wanted to address. Dave has done everything that was requested of him, which was pretty amazing, and he got a no further action letter from the state. I've got a housing demand study in here, and it's got some useful information. We've got some architectural documents. We've been discussing with a lot of people who've been involved in discussion, and I'm sure you guys have kind of heard about it, but the whole power pole issue has been talked about. And then I've been in conversations, but then the focus of this meeting helps me kind of amp it up. So I've sent pro formas up to both the conventional private lender as well as the HUD 221D4 lenders, and had conversations with them, and I'll kind of summarize that for you. And then I have investors lined up that I've been talking to and kind of keeping warm, but I have not put this presentation in front of them yet, and you'll see why, and it does involve whether or not we decide to go forward. So the environmental, I just described that. The housing demand study was really interesting. Can we move that so it's not chopped up? Because this information, the report's a little bit, the presentation's a little heavy detail-wise in the beginning, and then it gets to be more just, I'll click through some slides. But these were some interesting statistics, and I don't know if you've seen these same ones, but this is what we came up with. The critical one for doing housing, of course, is the median income, and that 45,000. And the point that it's well below the Portland, which is on the bottom, because we have the same construction costs. And so this gets really tricky, and I'll say it again in here, is the appraisal. So, and a couple other things. So we're even below the state, here. What was fascinating to me is we have a much smaller poverty rate than the Hood River or Portland. So that's a statement that was interesting. That was the data that I found, and you can find a million different sources, but I thought that was fascinating because it does go to the point of that people are working here. And the other point that jumps out is the $177,000 median homeownership price as well as the home ownership rate. And I think we know that a lot of people move here so they can buy a house and live in the region. But those data I will refer to again later as well. Did I do this? Okay, so these were some more statistics that were interesting. That's 2010, only 100 units have been built. You've got the one that you're involved in is the only new construction of an apartment building that's on the books. The vacancy rate is extremely low. The population growth is healthy. You know, those next two are that. Then this is kind of the live work, you know, the transportation to housing. And then the employment is really good. So as you guys all know, I'm sure, the lack of housing supply is affecting any number of the employers here. So these are my conclusions. The tremendous housing demand, very little new housing supply, either rental or new construction. The lack of housing affects the ability to retain people. And there's continued growth. Those low housing prices are really great for home ownership, and that's that's a good thing, right? That's what we're after. But it does make it incredibly difficult to build any new construction of any kind, those are your comps. So like I said, I've been talking to the HUD 221D4 program, and the good thing about that program is it's a 40-year amortization, so then that brings your annual payment, your monthly and annual payment, mortgage payment way down, which makes this project work. And it's got good interest rates, and it doesn't have a bunch of costs to convert to the permanent. You get it at the construction at the beginning. The problem is it takes a long time, and there's a lot of paperwork. The downside, though, and I know I am completely committed to good, living wages. What happens is you get in a market like this where you're trying to build new construction, get those construction job wages in here, which are higher if you go through the wages that are already in town. Those are the higher paying jobs as is. And you get to adding the data statement and prevailing wage, and the whole pro forma just goes out the window, just like that. So then you go, okay, well, we can't use the 221D4 program. So then you go to the conventional financing, and any bank in town should be willing to do this loan, and you will be surprised as you take these things forward how few will step up and actually do it. And the reason is it's just they haven't had to, and it's new, and they're not going to want to. So I do have a very good relationship with Columbia Bank, and so I've asked him to take a look at the pro forma for this. The problem with that is they make you underwrite the pro forma and make it work at a 7% interest rate. So then that goes out the window. So so this is fairly typical of working in a market that hasn't already been proven, right? Where you just kind of keep running into a wall and keep trying to get more creative. That's a 30-year amortization, and that makes it a much bigger payment. I would have put right now, if I'd had more time, if I'd done a walkthrough of this, I would have put the rents, because that's the critical thing also driving this. But, so for the things when you're trying to develop this, what I need to be able to do is show an investor that they can get a decent return, and that it's worth the risk, and the risks here are huge because it's so unknown. So even if it's just kind of like, if this is gonna be a good return, the 10-year return is 10 to 20, these are all the conditions that you're sort of looking at, like what makes it difficult to attract somebody. That said, I still think if we can fill some of these gaps, we could. This is what I'm putting into the pro forma for average rent. So what I did was I did the rents first, and then went and looked at the incomes required to support that. And then you loop back to the median income and see where you fall on that. This is how my brain works. There's a million ways to do it. So the rents there are they're high for here, they're low for new construction, and there's the income required, and there's the median income. So you would be going after the higher income people moving to town who want a new product. There's more on that subject. The appraisal determines everything, right, in terms of like whether those rents are valid, and I can guarantee you they will say we can't get those rents. So you've got those three considerations when the commercial broker does an appraisal. These are some of the basic assumptions that I'm analyzing as I go in and do this, trying to make it work. These are the pieces that I keep playing with on the pro forma. So here, at the top's just kind of a summary. We've got to gamble on whether we can hit the rents, the housing market, whether it's stable or improving, the construction costs, that they're not going to go up any more than they already have, that the economy won't have any major slowdowns or changes in the wrong direction. These are some of the things that would help fill the gap as we know it right now. And I'm happy to sit down with any of you, or all of you, or sit down with Steve and we can come back with a joint proposal. This is the housing massing study, because everyone always has a reaction to, you know, that's too big, that's too small, that's too this, to what you're doing, right? So the first thing to do is to start with a massing study, so we've done that. This is a ground floor retail with 3 stories of housing above it. And that's the same as the image that you were first presented with. And what's really nice about that is it's not so big that it dwarfs everything around it. It actually fits in nicely with this scale. And but you can see it from other directions, which is also nice because that's sort of that's kind of recognizing the new construction and the stimulation of growth in the local economy. This is kind of the mapping diagram. We're trying to get to the maximum. This was driven by, the number of units are driven by the number of parking spots, because you have a 1-to-1 parking ratio. So that leaves you with 50 units. That's how we get the 50 spots. That issue will also come up again. So that's kind of a diagram of what could happen in terms of these different unit types, right? So you've got a 1-bedroom, studio and 2-bedroom, and then you go back and see how that's laid out. And then on the 4th floor, the idea would be to have like a terrace and a fitness club. And again, I said I was repetitive, and I am. These are the issues you just kind of keep going over and over and over. At 46 units, which is what fits with ground floor retail and 2 stories of housing above, I cannot get the numbers to work. And again, I'm happy to sit down with you and walk you through this pro forma and show you, but it's just the economies of scale aren't there. When you get to adding another floor, and don't get me wrong, 70 units in this market makes me a little nervous. So you don't want to be jumping off with that number, but at the same time, that's that extra floor that starts to bring down some of the basic costs that you have to have. Construction is really high, and so some of the other things. This is at 70 units, give or plus. You've got $11 million. You've got Davis Bacon at 1.5. You've got soft costs at 2.5 and land at 760. There's a huge gap trying to build that. The alternative is, I've talked to people, and some people are building apartments, but they're the kind of the wood construction suburban markets that are like 140. But it's a very different model. So, it's kind of like no elevator and a much more suburban market, which is different than what you would want in the downtown core. The 1-to-1 parking ratio, I kind of outlined some of the issues here. It limits the number. I've done a walkthrough or walked around and counted empty spaces. There are RC spaces, there are private lots that you could potentially use after hours. And so those are just some of the things that, because the people who be here during the day for retail won't be here, they can park when they're after 5. What you're trying to do is create a 24-hour activity. And this is what concerns me a lot. Those poles hit the 2nd and 3rd floor, and that's your view, and you're looking through 3 poles and transformers, and I just don't, that's a non-starter. So I thought it was worth sharing with you guys. I brought twice in the last month, and I don't want to be the one to diminish the enthusiasm for what's going on downtown, but because I really like it here for all the reasons the downtown advocate said, and I do see all the changes just in the short period of time that I've been here, and I feel and see the energy, but I've walked 2 people through, and one was an investor, and it was this Monday night of Labor Day weekend, and it was dead. There was not a soul here, and I actually had another slideshow I was trying to put together where if you look at it as an outsider and you just walk right down there, there are a lot of vacant properties, there are a lot of substandard properties, and you're trying to attract people to say, no, this community is popping, it is on the verge. And there's a lot to to deal with. If you just do this walk from here down to the gas station and back, and look at it from somebody else's eyes, it's a tough walk. These are some of the reactions. The one, Ezra, he's a friend of mine's son who's got high-functioning autistic, and he said, you know, we left the antique store where he got some fun things. He's like, the antique store is just like the Dalles. You know, he said, the Dalles is vintage, you know, and it was just sort of like, wow, that's a good way of looking at it. And so, you know, these are some of the impressions that you don't have when you're living here, but you do have if you're coming from outside and you didn't come here because you wanted to move here. And you do have to get their, you know, them to invest. So, you know, there are opportunities, and I believe very strongly that this would be a really good contribution to downtown. And I can also do for you, we could work together on the 10-year pay, you know, the 10-year benefit for the taxes and how any contribution pays for itself. And this is kind of my work ethic. I will continue to be kind of open and honest with you. I can do pros and cons. I look at these things inside out, upside down, and happy to share that with you. And we build a high quality product, and so that's why sometimes it doesn't pencil very easily. This is the Canby project that we just finished. This is what the town looked like. I think pretty similar to the Dalles. Just kind of, these are the buildings and the condition of the buildings. This is across from us on the other block. This is immediately adjacent. And that's where we built. And this is what it looks like now, today, and this is just a year later. And it just, I wanted to show it from different sides of the building, and kind of this building to the left, I'm gonna show you some future renderings of that one. That's the one that would be a brew pub. And then already, because we did this building, they're doing street improvements across, they're doing facade improvements across the street. And nobody's paying for that, nobody, you know, forced them to do it, they just are stepping it up. This is what that brew pub will be, that beige building. This is a rendering of that. This is the inside and finishes. And then we're painting this weekend a mural on that wall to the left as one of many things that we're doing to activate the block. This is the team. We've worked together several times. That's kind of what I've worked on. And I thought it would be useful so that you understand my commitment to the public sector is strong and deep and long. And I have worked on all of these different public sector projects. And so when my concerns are as, you know, kind of deeply rooted in a good, healthy public economy as anything else. The John Group does just beautiful infill projects. I work very closely with those two. These are some of their projects. And then Sarah Architects has a really strong public-private background, and they do architecture, interiors, urban planning, sustainable design, and kind of infill as well. So these are some of the things that I'm hoping we can work with you on. And I think we're gonna have to get creative to make it work, and otherwise Dave knows he's taking a risk on this sale here, and whether or not it goes through, and truly, unless we can make it financially pencil, and he's been very, very understanding and cooperative in that negotiation in terms of giving us time to analyze these things, and so he's been a fantastic partner in this. So that is it, end of slideshow. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if that was too much or too little, but.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is the Waldenbrug Getchell Building possible relocation. I believe. Mr.
Madam
Cleaves?
Chair, Matthew Cleaves, from our city manager's office, will be presenting this report. And if you may remember, I think it was last March, Mr. Gleason came before this board. He had a similar proposal for his property on the First Street area. I don't remember if it involved relocating the Getchell building at that time, but he was interested in purchasing one of the parking lots and on the First Street next to his building, and I think doing some kind of an interpretive center at that time. So this involves, I think, the actual relocation of the Getchell building, and here this evening, because 2 out of the 3 prospective receiver sites are agency-owned property on First Street. Mr. Cleaves will be at the podium this evening.
Matthew Cleaves, 901 East 14th Street. Thank you, Steve, for summing that up. You have my staff report in front of you, and as detailed in that report and as directed by City Council, myself, Eric Gleason, and a team of volunteers have been working on a plan to relocate, restore, and ideally preserve the Waldron Drug Getchell building, which is the building to the north of the railroad tracks on the eastern end of the Lewis and Clark Festival Park. This came about through an RFP process that we started last year, and on the agenda for the City Council meeting on Monday to report on the progress made on that directive and potential alternatives. As you can guess, central to this objective is identifying a potential location, and close proximity and alignment with the historic nature of the downtown and the historic nature of the building are most ideal. And as such, we identified the 3 potential properties along First Street. The Urban Renewal Agency is the owner of 2 of those properties, and the city is the owner of the 3rd property, as determined by the group the least desirable at this time. The move will likely be completed by Emirate International, which has supplied a quote that is in your packet, along with an estimate or a draft outline of the scope of work that would need to be accomplished, as well as potential financial resources to actually make this happen. Is it possible or not? Some prep work, such as construction of a new foundation, will have to be completed outside of the scope of work provided by Emirate International, as well as archaeological services. And basically, the purpose of bringing this topic to the Urban Renewal Agency is to gather feedback from this agency, from the board, as to whether or not there is an openness or willingness to continue this discussion, if there's interest in possible sale, lease, or donation of one of these parcels to this project, and if so, what additional questions and information I can bring back to you. Or if there is not an interest in that, that's information that will be useful for the City Council in their decision-making process on Monday. And with that, I will answer any questions that you have.
Any questions? So you're talking about this agency donating a site, a building site, a resting site.
Possibly donate.
Okay. Now, the dollars to move it, are you requesting any of that from this agency?
Not at this time. The point of the topic on the agenda this evening is to determine whether or not there's any interest in continuing this discussion about the land and parcel. I can't frankly recall off the top of my head if the Urban Renewal Agency is identified as a funding source in the documents that I provided to you. I don't believe it is. So I think, and speaking for the group of volunteers and Eric Gleason who have been working on this project, the potential donation of the property might be sufficient financial contribution to the project.
Okay.
But it is a very tall and ambitious project. There's a lot of funds associated with it.
Yeah. So Emirates thinks they can move it.
Emirate conducted a site visit and evaluated both the interior and exterior of the building, as well as the route the building would take, and they said they could do it.
Wow.
And the proposed route, the most ideal route, which frank, would also be very challenging is directly across the railroad tracks. That's, in my opinion, unlikely. And so we'd be looking at a westward travel through the Lewis and Clark Festival Park, cross Union, and then back down first. But again, we haven't, we're taking this a baby step at a time.
Anyone else have anything to add or ask? Or comment?
Matthew, who becomes, so assuming that one of those parcels works, then who becomes the owner of the said property when it's all said and done?
So one of
And
the
the building and the-
reasons that we're bringing this before the Urban Renewal Agency now with the City Council meeting just on Monday, ideally we'd like to include your feedback and input and questions in the City Council agenda staff report. One of the reasons we waited is we were trying to identify and secure a partner, a potential nonprofit that would be willing to be the owner of the building and the owner of the school parcel. We did have a few conversations and back and forth on different board meetings and with different individuals. Two of them, Dallas Main Street and the Wasco County Historical Society, which have both expressed interest in the desire to see the building saved, but it is a very ambitious project and have not committed. Another alternative is to form a new nonprofit, but none of those have been decided at this point, and I wanted to have that answer that if you were to donate, sell, or lease a parcel, well, who would that entity be? I don't have that answer at this stage.
If I may, Madam Chair?
Yes.
If you would look at your exhibit that shows those parcels on the staff report, you'll see the 3 stars as the potential receiver sites. The one that's off by itself on the corner of First and Washington, that's a city-owned parking lot. The other 2 are the agency-owned properties. The one on the corner of First and Court Street, that's presently being used by the residents and tenants of the Commodore Hotel. And that property is also the subject of the E&A that we have now with Mr. Michael Leash and Company regarding his hotel proposal. So I think technically, at this particular time, if that was one of your priority choices, I think that would have to be a kind of an informal consensus, since we are working under the terms of the E&A. And then that middle star, that's one of the properties also owned by the agency that is between the Gleason building and the Blue building. So if you go there on site, you'll see one parking lot, but it's actually 3 separate lots. The potential issue with where that star is located, that it would leave a separate lot open, next to the Gleason building, which would practically negate its use as a parking lot or, a lot of other uses. And then the other 2 lots between the Star and the Blue building is also quite small. I don't know if you'd be able to use that for parking just because of the dimensions of the parking lot, turning radius, et cetera, and aisle width. So if the agency wishes to consider that, you may have some flexibility on whether to locate the building adjacent to the Blue building or adjacent to the Gleason building or something, instead of smack dab in the middle of a parking lot.
Looks tight.
Minimizes its future use. And also with the Commodore parking lot, it's my understanding that not the entire property would be needed. So again, kind of the placement of that, future placement of that building would have a substantial impact on the future use of that site for development.
Those are excellent points. And to the Middle Star property that Mr. Harris was referring to, one of the reasons we were interested, or the Eric Gleason and the team of volunteers was interested in placing that building in the center of that lot, is that there are historic, what one might call ghost signs on either side of the building. And while placing it immediately adjacent to a building would be better for future use of those other parcels and for potential continued parking, we'd be losing the historic murals on one side.
I can start on the one on the corner of First and Washington too, and these other issues. I know that we're really talking about parking too downtown. And now we're talking about taking away a parking lot. right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, the parcels, all three of the parcels that have been identified are all used as parking.
Right.
And you're certainly correct that it would impact parking, and that has been a hot topic in the downtown as we've revitalized that core and we have new developers coming in, bringing new developments.
Do we have an estimate on how many parking spaces we would lose by putting it toward an edge and trying to minimize disruption?
I don't have that estimate. I think at this stage, my real intent was to take the temperature of the water. And if there was not an interest in pursuing either of these options, stop right there, report that to City Council, and await their direction. If there was interest, we can drill down on some of those details, and that would be an excellent data point that I can bring back.
Let me ask you also another question. How do you come up with just these 3 sites? Are there not any place else you can put it that wouldn't hinder parking or different situations in the downtown right now, or?
Well, I think we were trying to balance the location of the current building and the historic nature associated not only with the building, but with its location as well, and trying to keep that as short as possible. Same for the move as well, frankly.
Right, make it easier to move it.
Right, as little movement as possible is most ideal. These properties are also owned by the Urban Renewal Agency, which may be a more willing partner, perhaps, than a private developer who might want to see a higher return on that property.
Well, this community certainly has a history of stepping up when it comes to saving historical buildings. I mean, that's how the original Wasco County Courthouse was saved and moved like 3 times. So it seems like if there's community interest and there's a couple of options really close by and it gets it off that Union Pacific wastewater parcel, that was something the City Council was kind of leaning toward, was if the funds could be raised.
Any other comments?
Yeah, Madam Chair, all I'm hearing is the city right now, and I'm thinking that we probably ought to kick this back to the City Council and let them deal with it. I don't know, that's all I'm hearing. City of the Dalles, City of the Dalles, City of the Dalles on this particular piece, and I don't know.
Well, at this
I
point,
need more information on this one.
he just wants to know if we're possibly willing to look at donating the property, because they're not asking for any urban renewal funds at this point.
I can try and flesh that out a little bit more. The timing of the Urban Renewal Agency meeting this evening with City Council means that my staff report for the City Council has already gone out. And to be frank about that, in that staff report, my recommendation is to discontinue the conversation about relocating the building due to these obstacles and high costs that we have, and reevaluate the possibility of doing something with the building, preserving, revitalizing the building on site. City Council may not agree with my recommendation and may direct me to continue to pursue relocating the building. Input from the Urban Renewal Agency about whether one of these 2 properties is even a possibility may affect that decision.
I like your recommendation.
I
think-
agree.
Yeah, I
I
think
agree.
the challenge is those are, we've kind of got a lot of moving parts that we're not really finalized on any of those pieces, and so it's hard to say one way or the other. Who owns the building right now where it's at and the property that it sits on?
I'm sorry, so the City of the Dalles is the owner of the building.
Of the building and the property?
And the property.
Okay.
And the choice is to move it or tear it down. Can't stay where it's
No,
at.
the response that we got from Eric Gleason's proposal in the RFP was to preserve it in place, move it 20 feet north out of the railroad right-of-way or safety corridor, or relocate it to a different location entirely, such as what we're kind of discussing here this evening.
But didn't the
And
City
then
Council rule out leaving it or moving it 20 feet and keeping it on the property?
I don't know if those other options have been ruled out. My recommendation in my agenda staff report is to reevaluate options, 1 specifically and potentially 2, revitalizing and preserving the building in place. The 4th option is potential demolition of the building.
Let me ask you a question, because I wasn't at the City Council or anything on it. Why would you not want to leave it there and redo it
Yeah,
there?
that's what I'm.
So some of the challenges of the building is that it is within the railroad right-of-way or safety corridor. And so I think roughly the front 12 feet of the building are arguably unusable. You can't occupy it, and there's some concerns about the
What was there
proximity of
first?
this historic building being so close to the railroad.
I got you.
And if there isn't a willing steward or someone who is actively preserving or restoring or doing the maintenance work on the building, it may be a matter of time before something happens that is damaging. And as such, we may want to consider demolition ahead of time.
So if you move it 20 feet, that gets out of the railroad right away, is what you're saying then?
That was what option 2 was, to address that. It doesn't address some of the other concerns raised by city council, such as accessibility to the building, future use, but it does eliminate its proximity to the
I
railroad
got you.
tracks.
Because you have to cross railroad tracks to get to the building, pretty much.
Well, you
close
cross
to
on
the park.
First and Union,
Go around.
and then go
Okay.
around. There used to be a vehicle crossing there, and I have all the documentation to back this up. It was slightly exhaustive, but it was essentially a vehicle crossing and then an unpaved pedestrian crossing, and then the crossing was moved down to Federal Street for the Amtrak station, and then ultimately that was closed over a 25-year period.
Jeez.
But it's also, it stands, if there is an increase or development of the wastewater treatment plant, it would go to where that building is.
I got you.
Matthew, I apologize, and I meant to drive by there before tonight, and I did not do so. And I cannot visualize in my mind, but if you're in the park, is it immediately adjacent to
So
the
it's on
park?
the western, eastern edge of the park.
But it,
So you have that traffic circle on
Right.
the eastern edge.
And it's
there's
right
some
there.
landscaping, and it is right there. And
so
then
is there a way to make it accessible, and there's room to move it 20 feet?
Yes.
Assumably. And so potentially could, and I know that at some point, I believe that the park's always kind of known, or that everybody's kind of, that could go away, right? The eastern end of the park for the wastewater.
Yeah.
So I guess you run that risk, but, okay.
I think if you're moving it, I'm no expert in this, but if you're moving it 20 feet or across to First Street, a lot of the cost is just
The moving
securing it and getting
Sure.
it in place. I don't know if there would be significant savings by
Sure. Not moving it,
not moving it
Right.
completely.
gotcha.
This is not, I'm not a historic building.
And so for those who weren't present at city council discussions, how much has the city put into this building to keep it from falling down so far?
Oh, and I apologize, I don't have that exact number, but it's several $100,000. A lot of it was 3 major things. One was a new roof. One was an internal heating and HVAC system to try and maintain the temperature and the humidity of the building. And the third major component is that northwest corner, you'll see where those roof posts are and some grading. That corner was starting to come apart, and a lot of that work is holding it in place and preventing further expansion. We have had some stonemasons look at that corner and evaluate some of the cracks to see if they go all the way through the building or not. It looks like it's holding it in place. But those are primarily the 3 components of the work, to my recollection. I may be missing a few things, but that was a substantial portion of the work.
Well,
Thanks.
engineering,
Right, right.
okay. So, any other further discussion? Do we let Matthew know what our feelings are? I, for one, don't want it moved.
I know I'm new to all this, but in the grand scheme of the long term of downtown, in particular the parking coming up and having those 2 particular agency pieces in there and other projects and it just seems a lot of effort into an older, smaller building. I understand the historical, and I love all the historical buildings around here. But whether or not this one's worth a lot of the energy and the amount of money to go into a building of that size and effort to move it, I would probably question that. And so I would probably don't see a reason to move forward from this agency's perspective.
So,
I agree.
I'm not willing to commit to the lots right now just because of everything else that's up in the air.
Yeah, I think we need more information, but the point about history is once you tear it down, it's gone forever. And we are talking about building a parking structure in order to meet long-term downtown parking needs. So the question is, how does that align with losing a few parking spaces compared to the timeline of building that parking somewhere else? Because I would feel bad if we tore down a building and then built the parking structure and could have kept it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean necessarily to demolish it, but the other,
There's a lot of
I think all you
Yeah,
were looking
there's-
for tonight, if I understand, is whether or not, the agency is willing to move forward in the future for open discussions for all these other things. You weren't looking for any definitive specifics, is that right?
Yeah, I guess if I can summarize it another way, is it a hard no, or do you want me to come back with additional information?
Madam Chair, we've got a project on the books, and I think that is going to be, when we can get that dialed in, it's going to be a benefit to the entire region. And those two pieces of property are basically kind of tied to that. And yeah, because at this point, we're not moving it, in my opinion. To either one of those lots.
Mr. Baker?
I think I'm in the same boat as Mr. Kramer and Mr. Raleigh, and that I feel like we look at these, what the council and the volunteer group might not know is that we look at these particular lots a lot. I mean, they come up and they are key to the future of the blue building and that whole, in any project, whether it's this project that's on deck now or the project that comes after that. I'd be hesitant to tie up these key lots. And, the decision whether it's moved or not moved is not ours to make. But if pressed about would we want to, do I see being the best, highest use of these lots at this time, I do not. So.
Any other questions? Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Appreciate
time.
the feedback.
Thanks for the information.
Okay, next on the agenda is the agency revenue expenditure report. Is that August 31st?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a request by one of the board members on having some more regular financial reporting out. So our budget year started July 1, so this is for the month of July and August. These are the reports that I get from the finance department on our two main funds. One is the Fund 200, which is the Capital Projects Fund. Also, that's our standard O&M, operations and maintenance, salaries, expenditures, et cetera. And then the Debt Service Fund, that's number 210. So I included the printout from August, and I also included the copies out of your budget books. Showed you a little more detail and also the worksheets. So basically, the two major expenditures that we've had to date have been in our property rehab, and we closed out the two remaining facade improvement grants. One was for the Granada Theater, and the other was for the Victor Johnson, the Herbring House that you heard about earlier this evening. And those totaled about $35,500 for both of those. So also included within that, those property rehab accounts is, we have a couple of interest buy downs, still, those will be with us for a few years. So again, not too much activity for the first couple of months. Our finance director, Angie Wilson, said that she will be providing you with more thorough reports on perhaps a quarterly basis, if you'd like to see that, or even if we have some large expenditures any particular month. So we'll be doing that for you on a more regular basis.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay. So next on the agenda is staff comments.
Thank you. I wanted to give you, we have a number of things going on in the department that affects the city as well as the agency. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a brief rundown of those. During Ms. Hanlon's presentation, she provided you with some information on household income and rent levels and poverty indexes, et cetera. There was a new bill that was signed just this year, came into effect, HR 4006, and it addresses cities that are considered severely rent burdened. And for cities over 10,000 in population, which we are, we were provided information. This was a letter just received from the state just last week. Since we are considered a severely rent-burdened city, over 10,000 population, we have 33% of our renter households are spending more than 50% of household income on rent. And we're at 33%. And the highest in the state are two cities. One is Corvallis and the other is Eugene, which I think have a lot of students. But we are up there in that plus 30% range. So what we are required to do by the end of this calendar year is to advertise and conduct a public meeting. And we are to invite, this is per the state, we are to invite a number of organizations and individuals and also a public meeting to essentially bring awareness to this issue. And there's, I think, 2 or 3 questions that we need to address and need to ask to those folks in attendance on the current situation of the rental market here in the Dalles, suggestions on how the city can improve things, working with developers, other interest groups, and it's kind of an open house on this issue. So we need to do that by the end of the calendar year. So I'm meeting with Joel Matson tomorrow. Joel is the director of the Local Housing Authority, Columbia Cascade Development Corporation. So I'm going to be reaching out to them to assist in this effort and also reaching out to the Blue Zone projects as well and trying to utilize some of their contacts. And following the meeting, we need to then report out to the state on the agenda, the number of attendees, who attended, some of the answers to these questions. We'll also be needing to respond to a survey. And all this has to be done by, I believe, the end of February or the beginning of February. So it's going to be a rather tight turnaround time. We're tentatively looking at the 1st to the mid of November to conduct this public meeting. Haven't set a date yet, haven't set a venue. So this is what we're going to start working on this tomorrow. So, again, as part of that, some of the numbers that were presented to you this evening. Also, thank you very much, Ms. Hanlon, for helping me and prepping me on my next item.
On that housing one, can I make a point? The one thing I heard today in kind of reviewing the options of how to make this work is there was a successful model that Columbia Bank has worked with in Vancouver where somebody privately built housing but had the Section 8 voucher. So it allowed for it to be built without the HUD red tape. But they were all pre-leased. So like what I've been thinking is 70's a lot of units, so if we could get an allocation of some of the Section 8, then you could identify those ahead of time and afford to build them. And it also helps the bottom line, because you can show that the rents can be achieved through that Section 8. So when you're talking to Joel, he's great, very impressive.
So the second item, you may have noticed also on her slide about undergrounding utilities. She had photos of the overheads. We've had 2 meetings now with the PUD talking about downtown utilities and perhaps a master plan or a feasibility study for undergrounding those utilities. Our last meeting that we had with them, we worked on a study area boundary and looking at the downtown. So we'll now be reaching out to the other utilities in the downtown area, both overhead as well as underground utilities, and inviting them to participate. So, and at the end of the day, for this first phase, we'll have the city, we'll have various utilities, and then looking to produce a memo on what would be needed or included within a feasibility study, what you would need to underground these utilities, all the different players involved, and looking at potential costs as well. So that would just just be the first phase. So we'll be working on this for probably the remainder of the calendar year. I mentioned a couple of times I'd been working with the state on a grant-funded downtown visioning exercise. We received notification from that a few weeks ago that we were successful. And then this last week, I did receive the beginnings of a draft scope of work on that project. So I'll be working the next few weeks on that, working on that scope of work. And this is a grant where the state actually goes out, selects the consultant firm, administers the contract, and pays the consultant. And so there's no local match. And so we'll be, part of that, we'll be conducting a couple of workshops in downtown and looking at opportunity areas. So it kind of fits in nicely to this utility upgrade study. And once that scope of work is approved, since it does focus on the downtown, which is within the urban renewal district, I'll share that scope of work with the board. Next week, we'll be meeting with KPFF, the agency's consultants on the First Street project. And the Parks District will be involved with their consultants. And this is an attempt to kind of marry the work the Parks District is doing with the Mill Creek Trail plan, as well as our First Street plan, which has got pedestrian, bicycle improvements, et cetera. So what we came before the City Council a few months ago would be to amend the scope of work and the project boundaries, which will allow us to extend the project boundaries west from Union Street to some distance to the west where we can intersect with this potential Mill Creek Trail along the West 2nd Street. So that's going to be occurring on Tuesday. And again, we'll have their consultants, our consultants, and we'll work together on this. And then again, be able to report back to the board as we begin this study once again. Spoke a little bit about the downtown visioning study, and I think we also mentioned at a previous meeting about this other grant-funded study that we were successful coming out of Matthew's office for a downtown brownfields inventory and study. Again, that's going to help the redevelopment efforts in the downtown. And so beginning to move forward on that. I think, Matthew, that reviewed the various proposals from consultant firms, and have you notified the consultant firm?
Yes, we've selected a consultant by the name of Stantec, and we're just waiting to complete the contract with them. Mr. Parker took a lovely vacation to Alaska. Just waiting for his return, and we will get that executed.
So exactly, explain what that is.
So Business Oregon provides a $25,000 grant option for what's called an integrated planning grant. That allows you to essentially, what the objective of this grant is to inventory the potential brownfield properties that we have within the urban renewal area, which includes a segment of the community to west along 2nd Street and north of I-4. Not only will we be able to inventory and kind of get an assessment of what brownfields we have and where they are, but we will be able to prioritize those through a public process where different stakeholders will provide input on what criteria we might use to rank different projects based on economic, social, environmental, and ideally set the stage and get us aligned quite well to go after EPA or DEQ funds to do actual cleanup. Why should the EPA give us funds for this project? Well, this is our #1 project identified through this process with community input and integrated plan. It makes us more competitive, in my opinion. And companies like Stantec have done this kind of process in other communities using an integrated planning grant to kind of set the stage and then go after larger fish to do the actual work.
Because we really don't know what's out there.
We usually don't.
All in one place.
I think it certainly would be helpful. And kind of anecdotally, I heard that when the 2nd Street streetscaping was going in, some tanks were discovered during that process. And, if we're doing underground utilities perhaps, this may help us identify potential obstacles to a project such as that and work towards eliminating them so we're not as surprised.
Okay, thank you.
And the two last items, one is the Tocola Properties project. At your last meeting in August, Mr. Parker discussed the goalie determination on prevailing wage. Board authorized the filing of that formal appeal. That was done. Had a conversation with Tokala Properties Dwight Untie this week, and the current status is we are awaiting the appointment of the administrative law judge and setting the hearing date. He thinks that would be in about 1 month's time. And the last item is the status of the Leash Hotel proposal. As you know, Leland Consulting Group has been working with us on this, reviewing documents submitted by Mr. Leash and his partners. I notified Mr. Leash on September 7th that there were some document deadlines had been missed, and Leland was unable to perform any additional work. They were waiting for those documents. And so I notified everyone at that time that I was suspending Leland's work on the project until such documents had been received or we had made other arrangements. Had a conversation with one of Mr. Leach's attorneys today and also with some of the Leland people. And it seems like what happened was there was some technical errors with this Dropbox system that has set up for receiving the documents. This is what Mr. Leash had asked for this Dropbox, and so there would be access by myself, Mr. Parker, as well as the Leland Group. It seemed there were some technical errors in that. That has since gotten resolved. The documents that we had requested have now been delivered to Leland and Company as of this afternoon. So I'll be talking with Leland tomorrow, and the next day they'll be going through, giving me kind of a brief summary of what's been received, and so we can get them back on track and start doing that. So we did have a little hiatus. There were some technical issues. Those have since been resolved. And again, I had a chance to speak with one of Mr. Leash's attorneys this afternoon to explain the situation and tell them what I would do. So I think this issue, we can move forward now.
Okay.
So with that concludes the staff comments. And I'd just like to say welcome aboard to our newest board member. And,
Thank you.
congratulations for your first meeting.
Okay,
Madam
next regular
Chair.
meeting, October
Okay.
16th, okay? Now, next thing on the agenda, board members' comments or questions?
Thank you,
Commissioner
Madam
Kramer.
Chair. Director Harris, you mentioned House Bill 4006, rent burden. You talked about we. Who is we? Is it the city or is it the agency that has to perform these meetings and respond to the
Yes.
state? And so is it both of us? Is it? So I'm just clarification on who we are.
Well, we is sitting at this table.
Okay.
So this is to the city. Yeah, so
Okay.
This will be the Community Development Department.
Okay.
Will be
Okay.
conducting these meetings.
Okay, thank you.
You're more than welcome to attend, sir.
Thank you. I would put that on my calendar. I got November public meeting down. Got it.
Okay, anyone else?
Madam Chair, welcome, Mr. Delaney,
Thank you.
to our wonderful group. And also kudos to staff for getting that grant for the visioning. I think that's going to be a real step in the right direction and really beneficial for our group and for the city and the community as a whole. And I know those are competitive, so nice job.
Any further comment or questions? Okay, hearing none, I declare this meeting adjourned.
We're city council and county commissioner. You know, a long time ago, I was on the parks board, a long time ago. And now it's just the park system, right after it broke out from the city. I was actually chairman of the parks board the very first time we closed